One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Okay, so here's how we're going to start today's podcast episode. We are going to start this episode using information that I know today as opposed to information that I had whenever I first started. I promise once we get into the meat of everything we're going to talk about today, it's going to make a lot more sense, but we are going to talk about transcripts for your podcast. And I cannot wait because podcast transcripts seem to be something that everybody has so many questions about, and I'm ready to dive in. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? Okay, so like I said in the beginning, we are talking about your podcast transcripts. And a question that a friend of mine, actually, shout out Melanie of the DIY Marketing School podcast, because she came to me the other day and was like, all right, look, I understand that podcast transcripts are super important, but I'm also trying to get this done with a very small team of people helping me. So, are they really that important? How does this work? Do I need to focus on this? Is this a priority? And all the things. So we had this long discussion, and I had a totally different answer than I would have given her even a year ago. So her question was, should I do podcast transcripts, or should I just not bother? So I first wanted to tell you that I absolutely have a love-hate relationship with transcripts. So I'm just throwing that out there. I'm letting you know that I love to hate transcripts because there are some pros and cons that we're going to talk about in a second. But back in the day, whenever I first got started, they were not as easy to create as they are today. So that's really like so it's like a deeply rooted love-hate passion that I have for podcast transcripts. So like I said, it goes back to the beginning of my podcast journey when I knew this from the very beginning back in 2018. I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I need to have transcripts for my podcast. And I'll link to a YouTube video, or actually it was a podcast episode where you can repurpose transcripts. There's like so many amazing things that you can do with them. And I learned this from other podcasters and watching what they were doing and how they were just making this one piece of content stretch out and just be so incredible. I knew this from the beginning, but they were not easy to create. Okay, like they didn't involve some of the technology that is readily available and super affordable, if not completely free for you to use. And we're going to talk about those in a little bit. I'm going to tell you some resources that I want you to check out, but they were not as easy. Now, there are just some fantastic AI applications, and I'm so happy for you as a brand new podcaster that you get to experience something totally different than what I experienced at the beginning of my podcast journey. So the process used to just be so clunky, but it's much better now. So we are going to get to those. But I also know that search engines, I hope your ears perked up, or I hope that you didn't just totally cringe up your shoulders because you're like, oh, she's going to talk about SEO. And I don't understand SEO because it confuses me. And I've been trying to figure it out, but I get it. I totally get it. And I actually have a podcast episode. If you're struggling with SEO, go to the show notes for this episode, crystalprofit.com/episode 173, and you're going to find I did a podcast episode solely about SEO and what you need to know to make it work for your podcast. So if this is something that makes you cringe, I get it. That's how I felt about it for I'm not talking about just like, oh, I felt like that for about a month. No, I have felt that way for the last at least 3 years. It's only been the last year and a half that I've really understood SEO and how I can use it to my advantage, make it easier on my life, and all the things. So for those of you that don't know what SEO is, that's for search engine optimization. And like I said, go listen to that podcast episode. It's going to be linked in the show notes to this episode. So search engines are constantly scouring the internet looking for content and keywords and transcripts of your podcast episodes that can help your show get found easier. And I am thrilled for you, like I said, because you are starting, I'm assuming, I know a lot of this audience is within the first 6 months to a year of their podcast. And we're just now coming up on being a full year that Google has indexed podcast. So let me paint a picture for you. Whenever I first started with the Rookie Life podcast and just getting things off the ground back in 2018, there were no podcasts that populated in Google. I don't know if you remember those days or not, but they were not that long ago where you would search something and you would just get blog articles or websites or a YouTube video. Now, podcast episodes show up in Google. I hope that you've seen this. I hope that you've recognized this as a podcaster because this is pretty important. This is why it's very important to title your podcast a certain way because Google is constantly searching for just keywords related to what someone is searching. If I were to type how to start a podcast into Google, my hope is that my podcast episode, how to start a podcast, would populate in someone's search results. That is how you really get your SEO working for you, and everything is just kind of magical when that happens. But going back to transcripts, This is why it is very important to have transcripts. It is. I'm not going to tell you that you shouldn't do them unless it is absolutely burdensome to your podcasting production. What do I mean by that? I mean, if creating transcripts is the straw that broke the camel's back, right? Like whenever you're sitting down to create something and you're like, oh my God, I have to do transcripts. I'm going to quit podcasting because I have to do transcripts. Okay, that's like the extreme version. But if that's how you feel about them, then I don't want you doing transcripts. I would much rather see you do a podcast that does not involve any transcripts than be so stressed out about it, like you're ready to scream, they stress you out so much. Do you hear what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Because I want to see you continue to podcast. That is the whole reason why I'm sitting here talking to you anyway. I want to see you podcast consistently, adding value to your audience, and continuing to have fun doing it. Right? I understand podcasting is a little stressful when you get started, just like anything new. You're trying to, get everything under your belt. You're trying to figure things out. Do I want to format it this way? Do I want to do it that way? Like, what does this actually look like for me? In the beginning, it is a little stressful. But once you get the basic things down, you've laid the foundation for how you want your podcast to run. I want it to run smoothly every single week. You should not still be stressed out about your processes 6 months from now. You should have at least laid a foundation for this is how my podcast is going to go. And this is why I think this is important to talk about this now, because if you can bake in the process of adding transcripts to your podcast now, it will absolutely pay off for you in 6 months, a year, 2 years, when you've been podcasting for a while and you have all of these transcripts, you have all of these keywords, all this data out there that the interwebs, like the Google search bots and all the other search bots, can scour your information and provide your content to someone who is looking for a solution to their problem. I hope that makes sense, because that is the way that I think about my podcast and why I label things a certain way whenever I am interviewing someone of importance or I am creating my solo podcast episodes. I don't come up with cutesy titles or something fun and fancy free. That, like, my podcast provides solutions for my audience, and I want them to be able to find those solutions through the way that I title my shows, the content that I talk about, and being able to use transcripts. Okay, I know that was like a whole long-winded thing, and I'm actually going to link to another episode. So remember, the show notes for this episode, crystalprofit.com/episode 173. Go check out the episode I did about show notes. If that is a question for you, like, how do I do this? What do my show notes need to look like? There is an episode called Podcast Descriptions and Show Notes, and I also did a YouTube video. I'm going to link to both of those in this episode's show notes. So I feel like I kind of got ahead of myself. So I'm going to back up, and we're going to talk about my definition of transcripts. So what are transcripts when I say that? So I am talking about the written form of this audio clip. And if you want to see what this looks like, I want you to go to the show notes of this episode and look at the transcripts. I'm going to link to where you can find this actually on my Buzzsprout page as well. I have a Buzzsprout website. I don't normally send people there because I want them to go to crystalprofit.com, but I do have a website for this podcast on Buzzsprout, and that's really where you'll find the transcript and where this episode is going to appear. I'm going to tell you about my whole plan, right? Like if you could wave a magic wand and what my whole podcast would look like in the transcripts. I'm going to tell you about that in a second. But for now, just know that a transcript is me taking an audio file, or you, because I want you to do this too, right? It's not just me. I want you to do this. But you take an audio file and you run it through a program that takes all the words that I'm saying, everything that we're talking about right now, and it transcribes them into a text form, whether that's a PDF, a document, or what it's called a TXT form. That's the text form. So if you have like a clipboard, what's it called? Like the Notes app? What is it called on your computer? You know what I'm talking about. The notepad. That's what it is. The notepad. I have a PC. On a Mac, it's probably the notes on the Mac, but that is a text form. It's very simple. There's no formatting. There's nothing special about this, but it has all of the spoken words. Okay? Are you with me? Do you understand what a transcript is? I hope that you do. If not, we need to discuss this further. I want you to go into the Facebook group, the Profit Podcast online community. I'm going to link to it in the show notes. Go in there and say, Crystal, I still don't understand what you're talking about. I need to see this. And I'm going to send you the link to where you can actually look and see what this is. So now that we've talked about the definition of transcripts, I'm going to tell you why I use them now and why I think you should too. And this goes back to what we were talking about with SEO. I don't want this episode to be really SEO heavy, but that is the main purpose for the transcripts. Because I have said the words, here's a great example. I've said the words podcast transcripts so many times in this episode already. So by having said those key words so many times within this audio clip, once I transcribe everything and it downloads and it's, converted into a text form, whenever a bot goes to crawl the information on my website or my podcast or Buzzsprout, wherever, it's crawling for information, it will find the words podcast transcripts said multiple times within this episode. So if someone is looking for information about podcast transcripts, this episode would hopefully surface as a piece of content that they could go check out. Now, the same would be for, I'm going to grab someone that's actually a member of the Potty People community. So Emma, she helps people who are writers. So if she wanted to talk about 5 ways to begin the novel writing process, and she had specific keywords that were related to how to get started creating a novel, or do you want to write fiction or nonfiction or memoir or whatever the case may be. Whenever it comes to writing, she could focus her episode and everything that she says within that episode around those words. So it's kind of like blogging. You don't really want to do a lot of keyword stuffing, where keyword stuffing for this episode is probably me saying podcast transcripts 1,000 times already. But she wouldn't want to just keep saying writing, creative writing, novel writing, creative writing, literary writing, nonfiction writing, fiction writing. She wouldn't want to do that, because if someone reads it, they're like, what? This doesn't even make sense to me. What is she even talking about? This is not a comprehensive piece of content that I want to check out, because it doesn't make sense. But so you kind of want to reframe from using the same words over and over again. But I highly, highly, highly recommend you do this so you can end up in search results. Now, going back to Melanie, right? Shout out Mel.
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
At the beginning of this episode, she was the one who originally asked me this question. And she was like, Crystal, I know that transcripts are important. Do I really need to do them? Do they make that big of a deal? Because I haven't been doing them up to this point, and I know I need to, but I don't really want to. But like, she was like really looking for the best solution for her without adding more work to her plate. And she was saying it just takes forever to format them because she wanted them to look great, right? Like, we all want all of our information, anything we put out there, we don't want it to just be kind of sloppy, right? If you're going to do it, if you're going to show up, it's kind of the same. Like, if you're going to have a website, you want to have a pretty decent website. It doesn't have to be, the Taj Mahal of websites, but it needs to be pretty well put together. So I think that she had this mentality of, well, if I do transcripts, then they need to look just like a blog post. They need to be formatted in complete sentences and, make sure there's enough space in between thoughts and all these things. So she was very stressed out about the thought of, I don't have time. I know that's really what it came down to for her. I don't have time to make these elaborate, beautiful transcripts. And I told her, I said, I don't format my transcripts. And she was like, wait, what? You can do that? Kind of like it was her just kind of like, I never even thought about doing that. And I said, well, here's the thing. For me, I do show notes for my episodes, right? Like, I create actual blog posts for each podcast episode. I don't use my transcripts as my show notes. Those are two totally different things. Now, I will say lately I have been like, after I am completed with uploading a podcast episode to Buzzsprout, I will then do the transcription before I do the show notes, and I'll find little chunks of audio or like, the text, it was converted from the audio, the transcript. I'll take that and I'm like, that sounded good. I'm going to put that in the post. And then I will look at the outline of what's in the audio and I'll think, okay, like this is how it needs to flow within the show notes. So I do use it that way, but I'm telling you right now, I do not go in and make sure that everything is grammatically correct and that there is a period where there needs to be a period and there's quotations. I don't do all of that because at the end of the day, I know that that's not how my listeners are using the transcripts. Now, we're going to go back to what I said earlier about like a magic wand. Like, absolutely. If I had my podcast with a whole team of people behind me running everything and taking care of all the things that I just don't have time for, or I would just much rather delegate, I would have beautifully written transcripts that are perfectly formatted. There's not a misspelled word. They don't accidentally spell my name with the C instead of a K, and Profit would always have 2 F's and 2 T's, which is absolutely not always the case whenever it does transcripts. And it says words kind of funky and there would be spaces everywhere. Like, it would all be absolutely beautiful. And then I would have that and turn it into a beautifully formatted PDF that would be uploaded on my website for even more transcripts to have there and like all the things. But that's not what's happening right now. I put out 2 episodes a week for this podcast. That is 8 episodes a month. I do not have time to create show notes and transcripts and promote and create more content and just keep doing all the other things in my business and for this podcast. So I don't. So here's what I do. And let's back up one more step, because if you're thinking, well, what do I do with these transcripts, right? Like, once I have them, I've had my audio file, I've converted it to a text. What do I do with them? So if you have Buzzsprout, if you are a Buzzsprout user, you now have the ability to upload your transcripts into an individual episode. So for this episode, I will finish recording. Once I'm finished here, I will save it. I will export it as a WAV file, or you could do it MP3. I will upload that file into Buzzsprout. And after that, I can upload the transcript as well. Now, I know you're thinking, wait, hang on, but where's the transcript? Where does the transcript come from? Do not tell me I have to transcribe my own thoughts and everything that I said. No. So there is a tool that I use called otter.ai, OTTER.ai. And this is a fantastic tool that you can actually try for free. I'm going to link to it in the show notes. And if you are a Buzzsprout user, it gets even better because they have brokered some kind of deal where you get a 20% discount. Hang on. I have my my Buzzsprout account open right here, and I'm actually going to look at this because I don't remember, because I know that we get a really good discount. So let me see. We're just going to sit here and you're just going to kind of hang out while I figure this out, because now I want to know. Here we go. Resources. Yes, 20%. So this is what I did. I had already previously used Otter's free plan for, I want to say I've used it for almost a year now, because I used it for my YouTube video transcripts. But now, since Buzzsprout did a deal with them, I get 20% off their annual plan. And I'm like, I already know I love this. And don't worry, I have a YouTube video all about how you can do this. So check out the show notes. I'm going to show you how I've done transcripts with Otter. So crystalprofit.com/episode 173. You're going to actually see this in action and how it works. But this is the tool that I recommend. Absolutely, hands down. There are other ones out there. I'm not even going to recommend them for you because this is the one I want you. This is the tried and true version of what I know will work for your podcast. So, in summary, right? Because we've went all over the place with podcast transcripts today, but I wanted to make sure we really hit home with, yes, you need transcripts for your podcast. Is it the absolute highest priority? No, it's not. The highest priority is creating your podcast content with value every single week. So while I love to tell every podcaster, like if you had the perfect dream world, then all these things would happen. But I know most of you are doing all of this on your own. I do. I know that probably 90 to 95% of people listening to this podcast are solely doing everything all on their own. And if the thought of doing transcripts just totally freaks you out, you're like, I cannot add one more thing to it, that's okay. This is not something that should be the highest priority for your podcast, but it definitely should be something that you revisit very soon. Like, I'm not saying put it on the back burner and think about it in another year. No. I don't want you waiting that long. Maybe for the next quarter, you're like, okay, I'm not going to do transcripts right now. I'm going to do transcripts, in the fall of 2020, whenever I, have my bearings or have, you figured things out. But I don't want you putting this off for too long, because there are people out there searching for the content that you are creating. They are already typing in the search engines and they're looking for what you are creating or you're about to create. So I don't want you to miss out on the opportunity to serve those people. I want you to be able to say, yes, I have the answer that you are looking for by having great titles for your episodes, awesome show descriptions and show notes, and transcripts, because that will help you get found easier by the people who really need to hear your message. But that's all I have for you today, guys. So if you have any other questions about podcast transcripts, and if you just want to know more about how this works and everything, tell me in the Facebook group if you want to see me do a training on podcast transcripts, because I would be happy to do a total walkthrough of what this looks like. But tell me in the Facebook group if we have plenty of comments and interaction about this, then I would absolutely love to do a training on podcast transcripts and what they can look like for you. But that does it for today. So if this is your first time tuning in, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. It's always so much fun to welcome brand new listeners, and I'm just excited for what is to come, because in August, if you're listening to this way in the future, then you already know what's coming, right? Because you're scrolling along, you're like, well, Crystal, I can already see all those. But for those of you listening live, in August 2020, we are going to do a deep dive into monetizing your podcast with a digital course. And I am so freaking excited. I'm so pumped because I have so many stories to share with you, so many personal experiences, and above all else, so many things that I did wrong that I do not want you to do as well. So I can't wait for that. That is what's to come over the next few episodes, and we're going to have so much fun. I just can't wait. So make sure that you are in the Profit Podcast online community. That's our free Facebook group where we can interact, and there's always posts in there all the time and people collaborating and asking questions. And it's just a fun place to hang out. Okay. We'll just put it at that. It is a fun place to hang out, but make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you're listening to this podcast. And if you haven't left us a rating and a review, I would so appreciate you telling me what your biggest takeaway was from this episode or any other episodes you've listened to, or I would just love to hear feedback on other podcast topics that you have questions about. Let me know. This podcast was created for you, and I cannot wait to serve you better in the future. But remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.